All right. Psalm 22. God is in control. I want to go over Psalm 22. I'm not going to go over every verse. I'm going to skip a bit, jump around, mainly because I value your time and I realize I can drone on and about things anyway and go longer than expected. So I don't want to read stuff that doesn't necessarily pertain to what I want to talk about. But Psalm 22 is amazing. Many people already know what Psalm 22 is. Um, it's similar to Isaiah 53 in that it is, if you didn't know what you were reading, you would think you were reading something in the New Testament. Um, it is messianic, and that means different things to Jew versus Christian. My guess is that they would have to delve into a little bit about what the Jews say about Psalm 22. I've looked into a number of different things, but um, anyway, so Psalm 22 is, and right off the bat, you're going to recognize this and why it is messianic and why it pertains to Jesus. And I mean, it's going to start right off the bat, and that's going to pertain to quite a bit to what I'm going to talk about, and why I uh, sort of subtitled this "God is in control." But again, I'm going to jump around a little bit. So I'm going to start off with verse 1, obviously, and we're going to go through 1 through 8. So Psalm 22 begins this way: my God, why have you forsaken me? Why? Well, let's stop right there. Okay, so obviously that's what I was talking about. Everybody knows that is a famous saying because it's one of the last things that Jesus said when he was on the cross. So you can see right away how this is echoes of Calvary. So let's continue. Why are you so far from saving me, from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried, and were rescued. In you they trusted, and were not put to shame. But I am a worm, and not a man, scorned by mankind, and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. Okay, so let's stop there. And if you caught that last part, that's familiar as well, because that is what the Pharisees were doing and saying to Jesus as he was on the cross, saying, you love the Lord, you said you're the Son of God, let him deliver you. And so you see how this pertains to Calvary, specifically, amazingly so. And the other thing that should be pointed out is that the way this psalm begins is the idea of God rescuing. That even though there are times where your cries to God go unanswered, and it acknowledges that, it talks about that. I mean, the very beginning is my God, why have you forsaken me? And yet immediately afterwards, yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises, because our fathers trusted and you delivered them. So this has to do with timing. Your redemption is coming. It just is going to be longer than you expected, and that's unfortunately the way life seems to work. It never is on our timing. nor is it often the way that we expected. One can say for sure that the coming of the Messiah was not as expected. But one can also see by what we just read, and there's more, that it shouldn't have been totally unexpected. But the point is that God is a delivering God. He does deliver. And you see here the idea of what can happen in life. Those who are actually righteous. So, this is David writing this psalm. And so, and maybe I should digress just a minute and say something about prophecy. Oftentimes, I think people have a wrong idea about prophecy generally in the Bible. It's not so specific as to say something was said in the Old Testament and it pertains to the New. At least that's not only what it pertains to. Oftentimes, when the New Testament writers are pointing you back to the Old Testament, there was a contemporary fulfillment. So when David is writing this, it pertained to something that was going on to him at the time. It pertained to that. It probably had a fulfillment as well. But it has another fulfillment that's coming as well. And oftentimes there's, Jewish people will often say about the New Testament authors, when they point back to the Old Testament, they will often say something to that effect, that no, that didn't mean Jesus, it meant whatever else. It meant something else, some fulfillment during that time, and we can tell you it was this or that. But oftentimes it's a partial fulfillment. It's not really what you read, and then it gets fulfilled in Jesus. And sometimes there are things that Jesus fulfilled that we're still waiting for him. He fulfilled then, but we're still waiting for him to fulfill. And that's how the Old Testament prophecies about Jesus work. There was no one else that could fulfill this. I mean, this doesn't match. I mean, when we're going to get into this some more, but this only matches one event in history that we're aware of. I mean, and again, then maybe there was something a little bit about this that matched something that David was going through at the time. But as he's waxing poetic here, he's somehow giving us specifics that are actually going to take place in the future with Jesus. And so, and it's one thing to say it couldn't be anyone else. It's one thing to say it couldn't have been anyone else, but imagine the statistical probability that the guy who wrote this, that it matches so well in the future, that actually is his relative. That Jesus is the son of David in that way, through both his parents. So the guy who wrote this is actually writing this somehow, freakishly, about his relative to come. And so the odds of that are just staggering. And so let's continue. So I'm going to jump down to verse 12. And I'm going to mention this. So verse 12 through 18. Many bulls encompass me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like ravening and roaring lions. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. For dogs encompass me. A company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So you can see how eerily specific Psalm 22 is in regards to the events at the crucifixion. And even if there was a fulfillment in David's time, I doubt his hands and feet were pierced. I mean, maybe there was something that took place with him where somehow his clothing was divided. That's possible, I suppose. But this is Jesus. I mean, and anybody who, if you just read this to somebody who didn't understand the Bible, but they were vaguely familiar with the crucifixion account, they would recognize this as the New Testament. That's how specific this is. Again, it's like Isaiah 53 in that way. And the beginning of this I added in, and others may think that this is sort of a throwaway Old Testament thing. The bulls encompassing and the bulls of Bashan. I kept that in there for a specific reason, and I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of this. But you see what's going on. I mean, so many things line up here. All my bones are out of joint. You can imagine being stretched out on the cross and what it does to your joints. There's that part where Jesus says, "I thirst," and the guard gives him vinegar on a sponge, and it talks about that, how he's dried up and his tongue sticks to his jaws, and the idea of the evildoers encircling me. And this is similar to the bulls, so it's recounting this. It's doubling up on this idea that the evildoers encircle him. And then obviously casting my garments. I mean, it's so specific to that event. It's incredibly so specific. So I'm going to go to verse 22. I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him, and stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him. So this part I included because it's important to understand God's perspective. Oftentimes we end up dealing with some difficulties in our life, and I think I mentioned this previously in another Bible study, that often the criticism of God is this idea that evil takes place in the world, and where is God? And I talked about, I think it was Psalm 73 I was going over, and how beautifully Psalm 73 captured that perspective, man's perspective. But understand something. This is why Jesus is perfect, and why this makes sense out of the reality that we are in, and it makes sense of how God exists and the character of God in the midst of all the evil that we see. I can't explain to you why it makes sense necessarily that reality is the way it is, in that we all go through tragedy. But what I can say is that the evidence lines up to say that God's behind all this. And he does give glimpses and life preservers, so to speak, to us of understanding of the tragedy that we will have gone through or will go through. And the thing that makes Jesus Messiah and worthy to be the judge of all is because Jesus has gone through it. So God is not asking us to do anything that he has not placed on himself or on his son. And this is what separates Christianity from anything that you might consider to be from any other religion. Christianity is absolutely starkly different on this point. It is not a it's not a list of things to get to heaven. It is God coming down to earth in such a way as to actually experience the tragedy that we end up dealing with, and even more so. So let's go through this some more. 27. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before you. For kingship belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. One of the things I want to point out on this is that Jewish people often, they have some excuses for why they don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. One of them is that there's not peace on earth yet. And that's fine. Christians go, well, that's because that's going to happen later and Jesus is going to be the one. Anyway, one of the things that is clearly messianic, that absolutely every Jew has expected and still does expect somehow, and I say somehow for this reason I'm fixing to explain, that the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, will bring all the other people groups of the world to relation and worship of the one true God. Remember that was the distinction of the Jews, right? They were the children of Abraham, and Abraham was in covenant with God, the one true God. All the other nations were worshiping all these other gods. And it was Abraham's descendants that were going to bring the world back to worshiping the one true God. And that must be what the primary focus, or one of the primary focuses of the Messiah. Who else matches that but Jesus? There is no, even if there can be no theoretical Messiah coming that's going to do that, because it's already done. It's already done. All of the tribes of the earth, think about the earth, all over the place, worship the one true God because of Jesus. I'm not saying everybody does. I'm saying that when the God that the Jews have been pointing to, who opened the Gentiles up to that God? Jesus did. So he can be the only Messiah. And so that's what this is pointing to. So let's go and finish this off. So posterity shall serve him. It shall be told of the Lord to the coming generation. So you see how it builds and builds and through the generations what Psalm 22 is about. They shall come and proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn. And this is important, and this is something I just sort of noticed in Psalm 22, that he has done it. And I want you to think about that. That's the exclamation point. Remember what Jesus' last words on the cross were. It is finished. It is finished. So I want you to think about how this psalm starts. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then it ends. He's done it. It is finished. And so this book ends the crucifixion. It basically says the same words that Jesus says on the cross. And so what I wanted to also talk about in this is to point out that oftentimes when we talk about Jesus being on the cross, when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I've probably heard sermons like this, and I'm not disagreeing with the point. I'm just saying, I'm throwing out another possibility or another way to illuminate what Jesus is saying here. Oftentimes what it's said when he says this is that Jesus is actually crying out in pain of the separation from God. Okay, it's possible that that's true. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying it's possible that that's true. But here's what I know is true. I don't know that's true, but I know what is true. Psalm 22 existed as Jesus was crying out on the cross. It seems absolutely certain to me that whether or not Jesus, out of pain of this separation, was saying it, he had to have been aware of what he was doing. And I think this was actually the point. Remember, for him to say, my God, why are you forsaking me?" was for him to basically cry out Psalm 22. Remember, there was no Psalm 22 in the sense that, I mean, this existed, but it wasn't called Psalm 22. It wasn't split into different verses and things. There was just a psalm that they sung in the temple that David wrote a long time ago. And how do you know when they're referring to it? It's how it starts. So when he says, my God, why are you forsaking me?" What he's doing is pointing everybody's attention to the Old Testament and saying, read what David says about this moment in time. I'm not saying he's not separated from God, from the Father. I don't know. I'm just saying when he says, my God, why are you forsaking me?" he's pointing everybody to the Psalm 22. And he's saying, this moment was foretold to you. And all the things that happened there. Now, the critics will say, now so specific is this now, the critics will say that the New Testament writers had Psalm 22 in mind when they just fictitiously created this. But that is the only other option. Because it's too specific. It's too specific. So, the point is that this is about Christ, and what he's saying is he's pointing out and pointing everybody to this was always the way it was supposed to be. This was the plan. And it was written down, and you can see. Now, for those of you who didn't understand, and everybody didn't understand, I mean, and his own disciples didn't understand, this should be it. Go back and read. You want to know why Christianity took off? It's because when Jesus was resurrected, everything then made sense. So for the people who didn't believe, it's because they didn't want to believe. And this is where it dovetails into the last Bible study that I did in regards when I talked about the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, and I talked about how people are actually evil. They're actually affiliated with evil. They've chosen a side. And what I want to point out to you is specifically in regards to the bulls of Bashan. If you go back in the Old Testament, Bashan was an Amorite region. They were taken over by Moses. But the point is that Bashan was specifically aligned against God. And bulls are ceremonial animals. They're often killed they're killed in sacrificial service to these gods and to God generally. These are the temple sacrifices, bulls are. So Jesus is saying that the dogs and the evildoers that encompass him, that are round about the crucifixion site, taunting him, he's saying that these are the enemies of God, that they are actually aligned in such a way. Remember that the Jews of the time that were against, not all Jews obviously, just those who were the leaders and rulers who crucified Christ, they claimed for themselves the mantle of Moses, and yet it was Moses who was against Bashan. So when Jesus says to them, The bulls of, when he points to them, he didn't say this on the cross, but he pointed to them, Psalm 22, the bulls of Bashan. He's saying to them, you are the enemies of God. You are not Moses's. You are not in the line of Moses. And so it just dovetailed really nicely into what I talked about last time in regards to the fact that, there are true enemies of God. And I also want to point out just the fact that, look, God's got this thing in control, right? He said it was going to happen. And even though the enemies of God do things, they brought about the crucifixion of Christ, right? It was what they wanted, but this was also what God allowed to happen in order to make that awesome salvation available to everybody. And this is similar to when Joseph looked his brothers in the face and said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And so God's got this thing in control. It doesn't matter what men do. He will use the actions of men to bring about his ultimate will, his plan, his purpose. And so let me know if there's anything you want to talk about on a future Bible study. If you like it, give me a thumbs up, share it, that sort of thing. So till next time, see you later.